you drill a single hole in the ground, doesn't take up a lot of space
Mm.
to have that single hole and run a pipe to a factory. It has incredibly low environmental impact. I wish you guys could come see a video over at Calpine. They have enormous biodiversity. I've never seen so many deer, foxes, raccoons, skunks in the same place before. I see at least four different animals every single time I ride up to work.
Oh, I love
Uh,
that.
and that just proves how remarkably low the environmental impact is of geothermal drilling.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew with the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure. And for those of you who don't know, August is Energy Month, which means we're educating on the importance of energy resources from natural gas and nuclear energy to solar and hydropower. And today I'm joined by David Perry, who works in drilling in regard to geothermal energy. David, it's a pleasure to meet you today and discuss geothermal as an energy resource. Let's jump right in. I'd love to start off by asking you, what is it that you do specifically, and how did you get into this line of work?
What I do specifically is I'm a mud logging geologist. So that means as they drill into the ground, what comes up through the drill pipe and is recovered out of the hole, the tailings essentially, I analyze those and I figure out what geologic unit we're in as we're drilling downward. And I look for the drill breaks and the steam entries that are associated with the steam that we're trying to gather and generate power off of. How I got into it is kind of a hard thing for me to really express, just because I was into geology before I even have memory. It's been an ongoing thing since I was 5 years old at the oldest.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, geology has always been a thing in my life from an extraordinarily early age. Geologists are just people who liked dinosaurs and rocks as kids and then just never stopped liking them
I love
when
it.
they became adults. That's basically all we really are. We're still the kids. We never matured enough to stop picking up rocks off the ground. Yeah, I've been doing this specific line of work for about a year now.
Oh, amazing. And how do you like it?
Oh, I love it. Geothermal is definitely my favorite alternative resource as it is. So I was very excited for the opportunity to get to work in it. Seen multiple lectures in the past. I've seen one from Yale, actually, that was talking about the merits of geothermal over other alternative energy resources. Basically, they were like, well, the two solutions for the future that actually have the wattage required for our needs are nuclear and geothermal. And nuclear has the obvious downsides that geothermal doesn't have those.
Well, that's amazing. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on what geothermal is?
All geothermal energy is it's energy from the earth. So the earth generates its own energy. It does it by form of fission, essentially the same way that nuclear power plants generate energy. Well, the earth is doing that in its core. It's creating heat, which causes circulation throughout the entirety of the outer core, which then creates circulation in the mantle, which transfers that energy up to the surface. These geothermal energy pockets are basically hot spots, places in the crust that there was some form of partial melting or a great deal of heat, residual heat left over from a partial melting event. In those little hot spots, you get water that is still liquid when it's under that much pressure, but when it comes out and you drill into it, it becomes steam and the steam pours out. Some of them are just straight steam pockets too. Sometimes it's not just hot water. Sometimes it's actual steam pockets. So we drill into those steam pockets and then we lay down piping and liner and we collect that energy and we run it through a plant. And if it's liquid water, when it gets to the plant, they have certain processes to heat up the turbines and spin them. I don't know the exact processes involved in that. If it's straight steam, the steam just runs right through the turbine and turns the turbine. There's also newer, more advanced technologies that are coming out in terms of how they generate and exchange the energy from the steam. I'm not really involved in that side of the business, so I can't really speak on to how that all the new technologies work. They also have lots of new crazy drilling techniques where they inject water into the ground to create fractures, kind of similar to how fracking works in the oil and gas industry, so that they can create steam pockets, places where there's no water.
Wow.
So that they can do this type of energy in places that otherwise wouldn't be able to, so that eventually, the entire world can have access to this type of energy. But again, I'm not on the side of developing that kind of technology, so I can't really speak as to the details of how it works. And I'm sure most of the companies, even if I knew how, wouldn't be okay with me talking about it because it's like competitive technology.
Oh, of course. Well, innovation and technology aside, what are some of the greatest challenges that you face and the industry faces as a whole?
The biggest problem is getting to the energy and making it sustainable. So, drilling holes as deep into the earth as we go, which is upwards to 1 to 2 miles into the ground, to get to these steam pockets is extraordinarily expensive to do. Once you get them, they continue to generate energy for a long time, and you have the ability to attempt to recharge them. But everything that you do is very subjective to the local geology. So you don't really know how long a geothermal vent is going to produce. You don't know if the hole that you're going to create is going to produce enough energy to even be worth it. And even then, once it gets depleted and you go try to recharge it, you don't know how successful the recharge is going to be, if it's going to cool the rock to the point where it's not going to produce for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen once the project finishes.
So there's definitely the question of longevity.
Yes. Well. I mean, obviously you can drill new wells that are going to produce better, things like that. And the Earth's always going to be producing this heat. And it's definitely better in some places versus others. So one of our rigs is in Hawaii, and that produces insane amounts of energy. I think I was talking with somebody who worked over there. I don't remember specifics, but I believe it was 20% of the island's energy is being generated off of geothermal right now.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it was Iceland has even higher numbers. I don't know the exact percentage, but Iceland has a huge amount of their energies by geothermal energy.
Oh, that's crazy. Just considering, the energy mix in, America right now, geothermal is not really as great.
No, most places it's not on the top. Yeah. But honestly, in your area in Montana, there's huge potential. I mean, that hotspot's so massive that you could practically power the entire country with it. You'd have the problem of attempting to transfer the energy that over great distances. So under our current infrastructure, it wouldn't be plausible. But I mean, certainly, the states of Wyoming and Montana could definitely be generating all their power off of it.
What kind of infrastructure would have to be put in place?
You'd have to figure out a more efficient means of transferring electricity over long distances. I'm obviously not an electrician myself, so I'm not going to try to speak on how to transfer energy from those distances. I know that AC, the alternating current, the way that we currently transfer energy, has a lot of loss when you try to transfer it over really, really long distances. I don't know if DC is any more efficient. I don't know if there's any way that you might be able to increase the efficiency of AC over those distances. Most of the time when we're generating power, we only have the intention of it traveling a few hundred miles at the most.
Okay.
Before it reaches people's houses for use.
Awesome. Well, speaking of people, and what would you like the public to know about geothermal energy?
That it exists at all. A lot of people don't think of it a lot. A lot of people default to things like solar and wind, which have a lot of their own issues. For one, that they aren't things that produce power 24/7. Geothermal produces power 24/7. It's continuously producing electricity. It's also a lot more of an energy dense thing. You drill a single hole in the ground. It doesn't take up a lot of space to have that single hole and run a pipe to a factory. It has incredibly low environmental impact. I wish you guys could come see a video over at Calpine. They have enormous biodiversity. I've never seen so many deer, foxes, raccoons, skunks in the same place before. I see at least 4 different animals every single time I ride up to work.
Oh, I love that.
And that just proves how remarkably low the environmental impact is of geothermal drilling. It's so minimal because you're just poking holes in the ground and you have pipes coming up from those holes. Like it's pretty hard for
rather than creating this ridiculous solar wind farm of like 200 of these huge machines.
Exactly. And the solar ones, they make a lot of sound and a lot of noise, scares away animals. The wind farms do. And then of course the solar just takes up ground space to the point where it's hard for animals to live in those environments. But things just the pipes are the pipes that pipe them into the power plant are like 6 to 8 feet tall, so the animals just walk underneath them, ignore them. They're all insulated, so nothing gets burned on them or anything like that. But the environmental impact is just so minimal. I was actually kind of surprised to see how minimal it was, because I didn't know what a geothermal power plant in a geothermal field looked like until I started working out there. So basically, all the arguments I've ever heard of why they shouldn't drill in Yellowstone just kind of flew out of my head. I'm like, I've been to Yellowstone and I saw more wildlife at Calpine than I saw at Yellowstone.
Yeah, that's true. Well, bearing all of this in mind and thinking about, all these activists who are trying to go green and, reduce emissions, yada, 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 I'm sure that you wish more people were fighting for this, as a resource, the main one.
Yeah, because I mean, you see all the dams and stuff like that are popping up everywhere. I saw a proposal for another dam. I can't remember where I was, but I saw a proposal for a hydroelectric dam somewhere, and it's like, yeah, sure, that's an alternative energy, but it's the cost on the environment is so high by damming up a river, and not just the cost on the environment, but the cost on the population downriver, because it affects them as well. It lowers their water levels, it lowers their water table, which is usually, when you get further down rivers out west, they're usually end up in the southwest, places that don't already have a lot of water. So when you dam up further a river, then you're basically saying that community has to have its water table lowered just so you can generate a little bit of electricity. When there are other options, geothermal being definitely one of them, especially out here in the southwest. There's a lot of residual heat from volcanism that existed out here thousands of years ago. So pretty recent stuff. I actually was talking to a friend of mine about Flagstaff, that they should drill for geothermal in Flagstaff, because those were volcanoes that existed within a period of time that humans lived here. There's Paleo-Indian drawings of volcanoes erupting up in the Flagstaff area.
Wow.
Like these little cones that they painted with little bits of smoke coming up off of them. And it's just hundreds of miles away from the volcano. So they saw it all the way in the distance, this eruption happening. I think it was like 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, I think, when that eruption occurred. So there's definitely still a lot of residual heat in the area. And there's not a lot of other things to generate power off of. There's not a lot of rivers or anything like that. And it's far enough north in Arizona where solar isn't as efficient. They don't get a ton of wind. So geothermal makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, it definitely does seem to make the most sense, especially in remote areas. But just on the whole, the likelihood of finding that energy and how efficient it is, and then we would be taking away a remarkable amount of crap, lack of better words, if we implemented this. So going to my next question, what would you like policymakers to know?
Honestly, very similar. They've definitely gotten all their heads turned towards solar and wind. That's what everybody talks about whenever they talk about alternative energy. It's solar and wind, solar and wind, solar and wind. You hear it over and over again that they're going to build more solar power plants. They're going to build more wind power plants. That's what they're going to put all their subsidies towards.
Do you think that it's because sorry, just quickly interjecting, but do you think it's because on the outside, it is just, it has the curb appeal of innovation technology that it just appears to be like we're moving forward, when really the answer can be far more simple? Yeah,
so geothermal is actually an older form of energy. Like we've had it since the 1950s, whereas solar and wind is kind of a newer thing. We haven't been using that to generate electricity for very long. So it does look a lot more innovative. It's also also comes off to the average person as not having as much of an impact, because we have to drill for geothermal in order to establish geothermal wells. But people don't see the effects, the negative sides of solar and wind directly, because they just see it as, it's just electricity from the sky. It's just electricity from, the air. Like it just comes out of nowhere.
They see it as a finished product too. They don't see, the materials being, everything that goes into designing these things.
Yes, exactly. So it's prettier on paper. Whereas when you actually try to implement it, you have the problem that solar power plants create a lot of pollution when they create the solar cells. or the fact that wind farms require a tremendous amount of maintenance that has environmental impact as well, and just the sheer acreage that they take up in order to generate power. Like, people don't realize like how much wattage you actually require to generate electricity for a city or a town. It's incredibly high. Usually these wind farms that are surround an entire city don't create enough electricity for that one city. Most of the time they don't, but there are exceptions. But I would like policymakers to really take a little bit more note at geothermal, because one of the number one problems with geothermal is it is indeed expensive to first drill the well, get everything set up, and get yourself into a position that's generating enough power for a city. Those subsidies going towards geothermal instead of going towards things like, solar and wind would encourage more geothermal power plants being built, or no subsidies at all for these alternative energies, so that businesses are more likely to go towards whatever's the most efficient and has the lowest environmental impact instead of whatever they're getting paid to do. I think either one would benefit the geothermal industry. I don't think its subsidies are going to go away anytime soon, though. So I would definitely push towards a good number of those subsidies going towards geothermal, which I definitely see as a form of power that's a lot more likely to exist further on, as a species. I think as humans progress technologically, I think geothermal is going to stick around, and I don't think a lot of these other alternative energies we're going to see is anything apart from things that people as individuals are using. I don't see vast geothermal fields. Vast solar fields and vast wind farms being in our future as a technologically advanced species. I just don't think that's in our cards.
Yeah, it doesn't seem
because it has its limitations.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as feasible, and I think that as you're talking, there's a higher chance for that to be sustainable over time. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Because the energy the Earth's creating is more than we could ever dream of needing. As a species.
Geographically, what's the process like to locate geothermal energy?
So I've been on the exploration side of things myself, but I can give you just a general overview as basically how we locate any resource. You first have to kind of pore over the geologic maps that exist, look into the geologic history of the area. You want to know that there's an aquifer present. Obviously, as these enhanced injection wells become more of a thing, they'll be able to actually create aquifers, but that's not currently something that's being done actively to generate power. But what they would do is they would locate an aquifer in an area that is known to have some sort of a previous geothermal activity, whether it be volcanism or heat, anything. They'll drill down into it. They'll drill an exploratory well. And if they drill down and they get steam into what they think that they've located as a fracture or a fault or anything that might be able to hold an aquifer, and they find steam out of that, then that would be an excellent candidate for a location to set up a geothermal well. And they'll look into the known geology for where that from previous drilling projects, things like that. If there was ever like resource exploration or people drilling wells for water, anything they might be able to draw information off of to kind of build a geologic map and a model of the area so that they can continue to drill wells and actually generate energy off of the aquifer.
And, going off what you said earlier about just the potential that Montana would have, that would be substantial. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, they just have to find known fractures in the rock that held water. And the water table down there is not as deep as the water table is up here.
Oh, no.
And the heat is a lot shallower too. So they wouldn't have to drill nearly as far into the ground to find it. Obviously they would have to do a lot of exploratory wells and stuff like that, because it's not an established geothermal field. But there might even be geothermal power that I don't know about in Montana right now.
Do you think that a lot of what's going on has to do with just people wanting to make money?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And geothermal isn't a great route of like making money instantly. It has a very slow payoff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's nice about oil and gas, is that you drill a well and instantly a ton of money is flowing on the ground. Mm-hmm. Whereas here you drill a well and, money's coming out of the ground. It's just, it's not as energy dense. Steam is never going to be as energy dense as oil and gas. It's not going to be. So That's the cost of going towards an energy that is easily replenishable, whereas oil and gas has a very slow replenish rate.
Well, perfect. Honestly, this is awesome. I really appreciate your input.
Of course.
Thank you, David, for joining the conversation today. And this has been marvelous, honestly. I'm super excited to see what our audience has to say. And yeah, we are very appreciative of you being here.
Yeah, thank you for the time.